she whispered. I wish you were mine. While I fixed her engine, I didn't know she was the girl I lost 10 years ago. The grease-stained truth. The call came in at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning. I was already elbow-deep in a 67 Mustang restoration when my phone buzzed against the metal workbench. Unknown number, Chicago area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I always did with unknown numbers, especially before my second cup of coffee. But something made me reach for it. Some instinct I couldn't explain then and still can't fully explain now. Hi, is this Jake Mercer? The mechanic on Ridgeway? The voice was soft, a little nervous. Careful, like someone choosing their words the way you choose your footing on ice. The kind of voice that made you want to put down whatever you were holding and actually pay attention. That's me, I said, wiping grease from my hands onto a shop rag that was already beyond saving. My car broke down about 3 blocks from your garage. It's a blue Camaro. I can't really afford a tow right now, and honestly, Google said you were the best around here, so I thought maybe I'll be there in 5 minutes, I said. I grabbed my keys before she finished thanking me. She was standing beside the car with her arms folded across her chest, not from attitude. I could tell, but from the October chill that had been sitting heavy over Chicago all week. Long brown hair catching what little morning light was breaking through the clouds. Red-ribbed top, dark jeans, small pearl earrings. She was staring at her phone like it had personally let her down. And when she heard my truck slow to a stop behind the Camaro, she looked up. Something moved in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something old and unnameable. Like a song you haven't heard since childhood but still know every word to. Jake, she said, stepping forward. Yeah. I climbed out, hands in my jacket pockets. You called about the Camaro? She nodded quickly, tucking her hair behind one ear. Thank you so much for coming. I have a 9 a.m. presentation downtown and it just died. I turned the key and nothing happened. I don't know what I did wrong. You probably didn't do anything wrong, I said. Cars have their own opinions sometimes. That earned me a small, tired smile. I crouched in front of the hood. Pop it for me? She reached through the window and pulled the release. I leaned in, and within about 30 seconds I knew exactly what we were dealing with. Loose battery terminal, barely making contact. A 2-minute fix with the right wrench. Nothing dramatic, nothing expensive. Just one of those small failures that stops everything cold. I didn't rush, though. I moved carefully, methodically, the way my grandfather had taught me. A man who rushes his work, he used to say, is a man who doesn't respect it. You're lucky, I said, reaching for my wrench. Could have been a lot worse on a morning like this. Story of my life, she said. Quietly, I glanced up. She was looking at me, really looking. Not just making conversation, with this expression I couldn't quite read. Like she was trying to work something out. Like she was standing at the edge of a memory she couldn't fully reach. Do I know you? She asked. I stood up slowly, studying her face in the gray morning light. High cheekbones, dark eyes. Something familiar in the way she held herself. Like she was always slightly braced for something. I don't think so, I said. But even as I said it, something in me wasn't entirely sure. Her name was Elena Voss, she told me while I finished tightening the terminal and ran a quick check on the rest of the connections. She worked at a marketing firm in the Loop. Had been in Chicago for 3 years. Grew up in a small town in Indiana called Millbrook that I'd never heard of. She talked the way some people do when they're nervous, filling silence like it might swallow them if they let it breathe too long. But it wasn't unpleasant. It had a rhythm to it. I handed her the keys. Should start fine now. Keep an eye on it, but you'll make your meeting. She reached into her bag. What do I owe you? Nothing. It was 2 minutes. She stopped, looked up. Excuse me? It was a loose terminal. 2 minutes and a wrench. I'm not going to charge you for that. She stared at me for a long moment like she was waiting for the catch. That's not how business works. Maybe not. I shrugged. But that's how I work. She looked down at her keys, then back at me. Something shifted in her expression. The tiredness softened a little. Nobody does that, she said. Nobody in this city does that. Well, I started back toward my truck. Now one person does. Wait, she took a step forward. Can I at least bring you coffee? To say thank you properly? I feel terrible just driving away. I should have said no. I had 3 cars waiting back at the shop. A busted radiator that wasn't going to replace itself. And absolutely no business standing on a sidewalk entertaining the idea of coffee with a stranger, however pleasant the stranger happened to be. Sure, I said. I'm in the shop most mornings. She smiled, a real one this time. I'll find you. She came back Thursday. 2 cups of coffee from the place on Monroe Street, 1 black and 1 with oat milk, and a brown paper bag of pastries. She sat on the workbench, like she'd done it 100 times before. We sat on the wooden bench outside the garage door, and talked while the morning traffic moved on. Ridgeway and the city went about its business around us. I learned that she had a younger sister in Indianapolis, who called every Sunday without fail, that she'd wanted to be a painter all through high school before life, quietly redirected her toward marketing spreadsheets and quarterly reports, that the blue Camaro had belonged to her father, who'd passed away 4 years ago from a heart attack that nobody saw coming, and that she'd never once entertained the idea of selling it. It's the only thing I still have that feels like him, she said, wrapping both hands around her cup. When I drive it, I feel like he's still around somehow, which is probably ridiculous. It's not ridiculous, I said. Not even a little. She looked at me like she appreciated not being argued out of it. She asked about me, and I kept it reasonably simple. Grew up here on the north side. Learned everything about engines from my grandfather, who ran the same shop for 30 years. Took it over when he retired, never seriously wanted to leave. She listened the way people rarely do anymore, like she wasn't quietly composing her next sentence while I was still finishing mine. Like what I said actually landed somewhere. When she finally stood to leave, she paused with her cup in her hand, looking at me with that same searching expression from Tuesday morning. This is going to sound strange, she said slowly. But do you have a grandmother named Ruth? Lives over on Elmwood off the main road? White house, big porch, rose bushes along the front fence? The air between us changed. How do you know my grandmother? Elena went very still. Her eyes moved across my face, like she was reading something she hadn't expected to find. Jacob Thomas Mercer. My throat tightened. Elena. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Oh my God. We had been 12 years old. The summer I turned 12, her family had rented the Calloway House 3, doors down from my grandmother's for one season, just one. While her parents sorted out some complicated relocation situation I hadn't fully understood at the time. They arrived in June, they left at the end of August. In between, we'd spent every single day together, building bike ramps out of scrap wood in the alley behind Elmwood, catching fireflies in mason jars after dinner and releasing them before bed because, Elena said, keeping them felt cruel. Watching summer thunderstorms roll in from the west while sitting on my grandmother's porch with lemonade. We always made too sour because neither of us had any patience for measuring. She'd taught me to identify cloud types that summer. I taught her to change a bicycle tire. We'd stayed up past midnight on the 4th of July, watching fireworks from the roof of the garage, lying on our backs on a blanket she'd brought from her house, not talking much, which felt completely comfortable in the way that only certain silences do. On the last day of August, she'd stood at the end of my grandmother's driveway with a backpack over one shoulder and her eyes already going red at the corners. I'd said all the wrong things because I was 12 years old and had no language yet for what I wanted to say. I told her it was fine. I told her she'd make new friends easy. I told her Indiana wasn't that far. All the things you say when you don't know how to say please don't go, or this summer meant something I don't have a word for yet. She'd nodded like she believed me. Her mother called her name. She walked away. I stood in the driveway until the car turned the corner and disappeared, and then I went inside and sat in the kitchen with my grandmother for a long time. Without saying anything, you don't forget your first real friend. You just eventually, slowly, stop expecting to ever see them again. I looked for you, she said. We had moved inside the garage by then. 2 overturned plastic crates, the Mustang watching us quietly from the corner like a patient audience of one. When Facebook started, one of the first things I did was search your name. I'm not on social media. I know that now. She laughed softly, shaking her head. I thought you'd moved away. Or that maybe you just didn't remember me the way I remembered you. That maybe it was one of those things that only felt significant from one side. It was significant from both sides, I said. She looked at her hands for a moment. Outside, a car passed slowly on Ridgeway, tires wet on the pavement. I thought about that summer more than made sense for a grown adult. She said quietly, I'd be in the middle of something completely unrelated, a meeting, cooking dinner, whatever, and some small thing would remind me of it. The smell of cut grass, a thunderstorm coming in from the west, and I'd think about that porch and those jars of fireflies. And I'd wonder where you ended up. I ended up here, I said. Exactly here. She looked up. The garage was quiet around us. Just the distant tick of a cooling engine, and the soft sound of the city, going about its morning outside. Light was coming through the side window now, falling in long gold lines across the concrete floor, and it fell across her face in a way that made something in my chest go very still. I wish you were mine, she whispered. She said it the way people say things. They've been carrying for a long time and finally, carefully set down, not dramatically, not with any expectation, just honestly, the way you say something true, when you've finally decided the truth deserves to be spoken out loud. I didn't move for a moment. I let the words settle where they needed to. I wish that too, I said. There were no fireworks. Nobody ran through a crowded terminal. We were two adults in their early 30s sitting on overturned crates in a mechanic's garage on a Thursday morning, with 20 years of separate living between us and the most honest exchange either of us had managed in recent memory hanging quietly in the air. But that's the thing about real moments. They don't arrive with announcements. They don't send a head warning. They come quietly, in the spaces between everything else. And they feel less like lightning and more like finally, after a long time holding your breath, exhaling. We had dinner that Saturday, a small Italian place on the side street off Michigan Avenue that she knew and I'd never been to, with low lighting and tables too close together and a waiter who refilled the bread basket without being asked. We talked until the restaurant dimmed the lights twice. We walked 6 blocks in the cold afterward just to keep the conversation going, our breath making small clouds in the October air. She told me she'd been engaged once and called it off herself, 8 weeks before the wedding, because she'd looked at him across a dinner table on ordinary Tuesday night and felt completely and utterly alone in a way she couldn't explain and couldn't ignore. I told her I'd packed 2 bags at 31 for a job offer in Denver. Got to O'Hare, sat in the departure terminal for 2 hours, drove back home. Why? She asked, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. I didn't have a real reason to go, I said. And I had this feeling, probably irrational, that I was supposed to stay, that something was supposed to find me here, that leaving would mean missing something I didn't know I was waiting for. She was quiet for half a block. Maybe it just took a loose battery terminal, she said finally. I laughed. She laughed. Somewhere between the second block and the third, in the space between a streetlight and a darkened storefront, her hand found mine and stayed there the rest of the way. The Camaro needed a full tune-up as it turned out. New spark plugs, fresh air filter, one belt that was one unlucky morning away from snapping completely. She brought it in the following Monday and left it with me for the day, taking the L downtown to her office with a coffee in one hand and her laptop bag over her shoulder. When she came to pick it up that evening, I handed her the keys and she looked at the bill for a long moment. Jake, that's what it comes to. This is less than half of what a tune-up costs in this city. The rest is a 20-year discount, I said, for being difficult to locate. She shook her head slowly, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. She folded the paper carefully, more carefully than a receipt deserved, and tucked it into the inside pocket of her coat like it was something worth keeping. Same time Saturday? She asked, her hand on the door. Same time Saturday, I said. She still drives the blue Camaro. I still run the shop on Ridgeway. Some mornings she stops by before work with 2 coffees, one black, one with oat milk, and we sit on the bench out front and watch Chicago wake up around us. Some Saturdays we drive the Camaro up the lakeshore with the windows down, even when it's cold enough that we probably shouldn't, because she says the cold is worth it for the view and I've stopped arguing. It isn't dramatic. It isn't loud. It's two people who found their way back to each other through 2 decades and a loose battery terminal on an ordinary Tuesday morning. It's thunderstorms watched from covered porches, and coffee shared on a wooden bench, and the particular quiet of a garage at the end of the day, when the work is done and there's nowhere either of you needs to be. Some nights I think about a 12-year-old boy standing in a driveway on Elmwood Street, watching a car turn the corner and disappear into a summer afternoon, not knowing that the story wasn't ending, just pausing. Taking the long way around. I'm glad he stayed. I'm glad she came back. I'm glad the battery terminal was loose.